The silence in courtroom 4B was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight pressing down on every person present. It was heavier than the thick oak paneling on the walls and more suffocating than the stale recycled air. Just moments before, a cruel titter had echoed from the petitioner's side, where Jessica Thorne, the mistress, had leaned over to mock the pregnant woman she was helping to displace. "Look at her," Jessica had sneered, her voice a venomous whisper meant to carry. Pathetic, hiding behind a pregnancy to get a bigger settlement. Then the impossible happened. Catherine Sterling, the pregnant wife, had produced a document, and with a steady hand she signed it. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't emotion. It was the judge's paycheck. And as Judge Evelyn Roth's eyes widened in disbelief, that profound, crushing silence fell a silence that signaled the end of a game and the beginning of a reckoning. Life on Beacon Hill was a meticulously curated performance. For Catherine Sterling, the stage was a 5-story brownstone of historical significance, a fortress of brick and ivy overlooking the Boston Common. Its interiors were a testament to quiet old money, the kind that didn't shout, but rather whispered its dominance through the patina of antique silver and the silent weight of oil paintings depicting ancestors with stern, unforgiving eyes. For 5 years, Catherine had played her part as the wife of Richard Sterling, a man whose ambition burned with the heat of a nova. Richard, a partner at the private equity firm, Sterling and Finch Associates, was a masterpiece of his own creation. He had the right jawline, the right tailor, and the perfect wife, a Devereux from a family whose name was etched onto the cornerstones of libraries and hospital wings across New England. What Richard never fully grasped was that the Devereux influence wasn't just historical. It was a living, breathing entity. He saw Catherine as its docile, decorative custodian, not its wielder. She was gentle. She was kind. Her days filled with charity luncheons and overseeing the renovations of their summer home in Nantucket. He loved her, or so he claimed, in the way a man loves a prized possession that validates his own success. He saw her inheritance as a comfortable safety net, a static pool of wealth to be drawn upon, not a dynamic force in the world. The first cracks in their gilded cage were not dramatic fissures, but hairline fractures. They appeared as late nights, Richard explained away, as closing the Henderson deal, or weekend trips for investor meetings in Zurich. Catherine, raised to trust and to endure, accepted his excuses. She would wait up for him, the staff dismissed for the night, leaving the cavernous house filled with the ticking of a grandfather clock that seemed to be counting down to an inevitable conclusion. She'd find the scent of a different perfume on his suit jackets, not the cheap, cloying smell of a one-night stand, but something expensive, complex, and persistent. It was the scent of a rival, not a dalliance. The pregnancy was a secret she held close for 8 weeks, a fragile pearl of hope. She imagined telling Richard pictured his manufactured surprise melting into genuine joy, the baby a tether that might pull him back from the precipice of his ambition and back into their home. She planned a dinner, his favorite meal of pan-seared scallops and risotto, a bottle of vintage Bordeaux decanted and breathing on the mahogany sideboard. That was the night the fractures shattered the foundation completely. He called at 7, his voice tight and rushed. "Kate, so sorry. The deal is imploding. Have to pull an all-nighter with the team. Don't wait up." Disappointment, cold and familiar, settled in her stomach. She ate alone at the 12-foot dining table, the 2 empty place settings mocking her. Later, unable to sleep, she wandered into his home office, a room panelled in dark cherry wood that always smelled of leather and accomplishment. She was looking for a book on prenatal nutrition she thought she'd seen there. Her hand brushed against his briefcase, which he'd uncharacteristically left unlatched. A folder thin and innocuous lay on top. It wasn't a deal memo. It was a reservation confirmation, a suite at the Mandarin Oriental, for 2 nights, starting that very evening. The name on the reservation alongside his was not a client or a colleague. It was Jessica Thorne. Catherine knew the name. Jessica was a junior analyst at a rival firm, a woman whose reputation for aggressive networking was legendary. She'd seen her at industry galas, a shark in a silk dress, all sharp angles, and a predatory smile. The confirmation was paired with a receipt from a jeweler on Newbury Street, a diamond tennis bracelet purchased 3 days prior. A gift, Catherine knew, with sickening certainty, that was not for her. The air left her lungs. The baby inside her, once a source of quiet joy, now felt like a lead weight. For a long moment, she stood motionless in the silent, opulent office, the damning papers in her hand. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall no longer sounded like a countdown, but the rhythmic, merciless hammering of nails into a coffin. The performance was over. The gilded cage had become a prison, and she had just been handed the key. But she wouldn't just leave. She would dismantle it, brick by gilded brick. She picked up her phone, not to call her mother or her friends, but a number she hadn't dialed in over a year. "Benjamin," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. "It's Catherine Sterling. I need to retain your services. It's about Richard." A pause on the other end, then a calm, steady voice. "I'll clear my morning. My office at 9. Benjamin Carter's office was the antithesis of Richard's world. Located in a modest but respected building downtown, it was filled with books, not trophies. The scent was of old paper and brewed coffee, not ostentatious leather. Benjamin had been the Devereux family lawyer for 2 decades, a man whose loyalty was as deeply ingrained as the legal precedents he quoted. He had known Catherine since she was a girl in pigtails, and he viewed Richard Sterling with a professional skepticism that had over the years curdled into personal distrust. When Catherine walked in, pale but composed, he saw not the girl, but the woman she had become. He saw the Devereux steel in her spine. She laid the hotel confirmation and the jewelry receipt on his polished desk without a word. She didn't cry. Her anger was a cold, efficient fire. "He wants a war. Benjamin," she said, her voice low and even. "He just doesn't know what kind of army I have." She told him everything, the late nights, the emotional distance, the blatant lies. And then she told him about the baby. Benjamin's expression, usually a mask of professional neutrality, softened with a flicker of profound sympathy. "Kate, I am so sorry." "Don't be," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "This isn't a tragedy. It's a clarification. He has made his choice. Now I will make mine. I want the divorce to be swift, clean, and utterly brutal. I want to protect the baby, and I want to protect my family's assets. He has commingled his business funds with my inheritance in ways I'm only now beginning to suspect are improper." For the next 3 hours they mapped out the strategy. Benjamin explained the grim realities of a high-asset divorce in Massachusetts. Richard, as her husband of 5 years, would have a claim to a significant portion of the marital estate. His lawyers would argue that his financial genius had grown their wealth, conveniently ignoring that the seed capital for his firm, Sterling and Finch, had come directly from a Devereux family trust Catherine had granted him access to. "He will fight dirty," Benjamin warned. "He will try to paint you as emotionally unstable as a spendthrift, anything to diminish your claim and character." "Let him," Catherine said. "He thinks he's fighting a society wife. He's forgotten I have a degree in finance from Wharton and that I sit on the board of the foundation." This was the ace up her sleeve, the truth Richard had always managed to conveniently overlook. Catherine wasn't just an heiress. She was the acting chairperson of the Ethelred Family Foundation, a philanthropic behemoth with a multi-billion-dollar endowment. It was a legacy passed down from her grandfather, Ethelred Devereux, a man who believed that great wealth came with profound responsibility. The foundation funded everything from medical research to arts programs to crucially judicial reform and continuing education initiatives throughout the state. It was a quiet, immense power operating behind the scenes, shaping the world in ways Richard, with his focus on hostile takeovers and profit margins, could never comprehend. The confrontation with Richard happened 2 days later. He came home late, humming a man drunk on his own success and deceit. He found Catherine not in the bedroom, but waiting for him in the grand library, seated in a high-backed leather chair, a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. His smile faltered when he saw her expression. "Tough day?" he asked, attempting a casual tone as he loosened his tie. "You could say that," she replied, her voice cool. She slid a single manila envelope across the vast expanse of the antique desk between them. "You've been served, Richard." He froze his hand midway through unbuttoning his collar. He opened the envelope, and his face paled as he read the legal summons. Disbelief warred with anger. "Are you insane?" "A divorce over what? A few late nights at the office." "Let's not insult each other with lies," Catherine said, standing up. The movement revealed the slight but definite curve of her belly beneath her silk blouse for the first time. "Not anymore. I know about Jessica Thorne. I know about the Mandarin Oriental. I know about the bracelet." Richard's eyes flicked down to her stomach, and a new calculating expression took over. It wasn't concern, it was assessment. He was recalibrating his strategy. "You're pregnant?" "Yes." A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. He saw it not as a complication, but as leverage. Well, this changes things, doesn't it, a baby? My heir. We can't possibly divorce now. Think of the child." "I am thinking of the child," Catherine shot back, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "I'm thinking of raising my child in a home that values honesty and integrity, not one built on lies and infidelity. I'm thinking of ensuring my child's future is secure from a man who would drain its inheritance to fund his affairs." The smirk vanished, replaced by pure venom. "You foolish woman. Do you have any idea what you're starting? I built this life for us. That money was just sitting there collecting dust before I put it to work. I made us powerful. You try to take that from me, and I will drag you through a hell you cannot even imagine. I will take this house, I will take the child, and I will leave you with nothing. By the time my lawyers are done with you, everyone will believe you're an unhinged, hysterical gold digger." He stormed out of the library, the slammed door echoing like a declaration of war. Catherine stood her ground, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. The battle lines were drawn. He had threatened to burn her world down, ignorant of the fact that she owned the ground his world was built on. The initial salvos of the divorce were fired through lawyers. Richard retained the services of Diane Harding from the notoriously aggressive firm Harding and Crow. Her first letter was a masterclass in legal intimidation, a 20-page document outlining Richard's non-negotiable terms. He demanded sole ownership of the Beacon Hill brownstone, the Nantucket estate, 60% of all liquid assets, and most audaciously primary physical custody of the unborn child, with a motion to question paternity, unless Catherine submitted to his terms. "It's a classic shock-and-awe tactic," Benjamin Carter explained over the phone, his voice a balm of calm against the inflammatory text. He's trying to scare you into a quick, unfavorable settlement." "He succeeded in shocking me with his audacity," Catherine replied dryly, "but not in scaring me." While the lawyers exchanged increasingly hostile correspondence, Richard and Jessica began a campaign of psychological warfare. They were suddenly Boston's most visible couple. Photographs appeared in society columns of them, dining at exclusive restaurants, laughing at charity galas events Catherine and Richard used to attend together. Jessica took to social media, posting thinly veiled provocations. A photo of her wrist adorned with the new diamond tennis bracelet, captioned, "Some men just know how to appreciate a woman." A shot of her drinking champagne on a private jet, tagged at an airfield Richard often used for business, captioned, "To new beginnings and leaving the past behind." Each post was a calculated pinprick designed to unravel Catherine's composure. Her friends called their voices a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. She politely deflected their questions, maintaining a dignified public silence. Privately, however, the stress was a constant gnawing presence. The morning sickness was relentless, and the weight of the legal battle felt immense. There were nights she lay awake, Richard's threats echoing in the darkness, a sliver of fear piercing her resolve. Was he right? Could he turn the world against her? Her strength came from two sources. The first was the quiet, fluttering kicks that had just begun in her womb, a reminder of the life she was fighting for. The second was her work at the Ethelred Foundation. While Richard was flaunting his affair, Catherine was chairing board meetings, approving multi-million-dollar grants for pediatric cancer research, and finalizing the funding for a new inner-city arts program. Her work was a grounding force, a reminder of her true identity, beyond that of Richard Sterling's wife. It was her power, her purpose, and the source of the weapon she and Benjamin were quietly preparing. They hired a team of forensic accountants who began the painstaking process of untangling Richard's finances. What they uncovered was worse than Catherine had suspected. Richard hadn't just used her trust fund as seed money, he had used it as his personal slush fund. He had leveraged Ethelred-backed assets to secure risky loans, funneled foundation-related investment returns into his own private accounts, and written off lavish personal expenses, trips with Jessica cars, expensive gifts as business costs for Sterling and Finch. He was a financial parasite, and the scale of his embezzlement was staggering. "He's a house of cards, Kate," Benjamin told her during one of their meetings, pointing to a complex flowchart the accountants had created. "He looks impressive from the outside, but the entire structure is propped up by your family's money. If we pull it out, he collapses." "Then we wait for the right moment to pull," Catherine decided. The right moment, they knew, would be in court. Harding and Crowe, on behalf of Richard, filed a motion for a preliminary hearing. They were requesting temporary spousal support from Catherine, to Richard a laughable claim, but one designed to humiliate her and to force the immediate sale of several jointly owned art pieces. They wanted to bleed her financially and emotionally before the real discovery process began. The hearing was set for a Tuesday in October. The day before, Catherine felt a wave of anxiety. She would have to face him, and she would have to face her, in a courtroom, pregnant, vulnerable, and publicly judged. Benjamin called her that evening. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Catherine took a deep breath, placing a hand on her belly. "I'm ready." "Good," he said. "The documents are prepared. The trap is set. All you have to do is walk in there and remember who you are. You are not the victim in this story, Kate. You are the reckoning." His words settled her nerves. He was right. Richard and Jessica saw a scorned wife. They were about to meet the chairperson of the Ethelred Family Foundation. The storm they had so arrogantly gathered was about to break, and they had no idea they were standing at its epicenter. Courtroom 4B of the Suffolk County Family and Probate Court was an arena designed for quiet misery. The air was thick with the ghosts of past battles, of whispered accusations and choked back tears. The wooden benches were hard and unforgiving, and the fluorescent lights cast a sterile, unflattering glare on everyone. For Catherine, walking in felt like stepping onto a stage for a play she never wished to be a part of. She saw them immediately. Richard and Jessica Thorne were seated at the petitioner's table with their lawyer, Diane Harding. Richard wore his most confident suit, a bespoke charcoal grey number that screamed Master of the Universe. He looked tan and rested. Beside him, Jessica was a vision of smug triumph. She was dressed in a sharp, blood-red dress, a stark and deliberate contrast to Catherine's conservative navy maternity dress. She leaned in to whisper something in Richard's ear, and he chuckled, not even bothering to glance in Catherine's direction. It was a performance of dismissal of utter contempt. Catherine took her seat beside Benjamin Carter, her back ramrod straight. She kept her eyes fixed forward, refusing to engage in their theatrical display. She could feel Jessica's stare on her, a physical prickle on her skin. She focused on her breathing, on the tiny life kicking gently inside her. "I am here for you," she thought. "This is for us." The proceedings began with the dry drone of the court clerk. Judge Evelyn Roth entered and took her seat on the bench. She was a woman in her late 50s with a reputation for being sharp, no-nonsense, and fair. She surveyed the room over her spectacles, her expression unreadable. Diane Harding began her voice, smooth and practiced. She painted a picture of Richard as a wronged husband, a financial visionary whose volatile, emotionally overwrought wife had capriciously decided to end their marriage. She spoke of Catherine's erratic spending and unpredictable moods, thinly veiled allusions to her pregnancy. "Mr. Sterling is simply seeking to maintain the financial stability he worked so hard to create while this unfortunate matter is resolved," Harding concluded, gesturing to Richard. "He asks for temporary support to cover his living and business expenses, which have been jeopardized by Mrs. Sterling's impulsive freezing of their joint accounts." It was a breathtaking twisting of the truth. Benjamin Carter stood to rebut his voice, a calm counterpoint to Harding's theatricality. "Your Honor, the assertion that my client is emotionally overwrought is a baseless and offensive fabrication. The accounts were frozen upon my advice after we discovered significant and deeply troubling financial irregularities on the part of Mr. Sterling. We have forensic evidence suggesting a pattern of embezzlement and misuse of funds that stretches back years. Mr. Sterling is not a victim here. He is the architect of this divorce." Judge Roth listened impassively, making notes. The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension. Richard's confident facade began to crack. He shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. Jessica, however, seemed to relish the drama. She leaned forward, her eyes glinting. It was during a brief pause, as the judge reviewed a document, that Jessica made her move. She leaned across the table toward Richard, but her whisper was intentionally loud, a stage whisper designed to carry across the short distance to Catherine's table. "Look at her," she hissed, a smirk playing on her lips. "Hiding behind that belly. It's so transparent. Anything to get a bigger settlement." Catherine flinched as if struck. The words landed like stones in the quiet room. Benjamin put a restraining hand on her arm. Judge Roth looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Counsel, please control your associate." Diane Harding shot a warning glance at Jessica, but the mistress was emboldened. She felt untouchable. She leaned toward Richard again. This time her voice was even clearer, laced with a cruel, mocking sweetness. "I wonder if he's even sure it's his." Gasps rippled through the small public gallery. Richard, to his discredit, did nothing to silence her. A flicker of something ugly, perhaps satisfaction, crossed his face. He was letting her be his weapon. This was too much for the judge. "Ms. Thorne." Judge Roth's voice was like the crack of a whip. "Another outburst from you, and I will have you removed for contempt of court. This is not a theatre." Jessica shrank back, but the damage was done. The poison was in the air. Catherine felt a hot flush of shame and rage creep up her neck. Her baby. She had mocked her unborn child. In that moment, any lingering trace of doubt, any thought of a quiet, dignified exit evaporated. They had chosen to humiliate her in a court of law. She would respond in kind. She looked at Benjamin, her eyes blazing. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was sprung. The moment had arrived. Benjamin Carter rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He held a slim, elegant-looking portfolio bound in dark blue leather. "Your Honor, my apologies for the interruptions. Before we proceed with our rebuttal to the petitioner's financial claims, there is a small but time-sensitive administrative matter that my client, in her professional capacity, needs to attend to. With the court's indulgence, it will only take a moment." Judge Roth looked perplexed, and a hint of annoyance crossed her features. "Mr. Carter, this is highly irregular. What administrative matter could possibly be so urgent that it needs to be addressed in the middle of a hearing?" Diane Harding jumped to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly a stalling tactic. It's irrelevant to these proceedings." "On the contrary," Benjamin said, his voice smooth as silk, "it is profoundly relevant to the matter of financial stewardship and professional responsibility, which Ms. Harding so eagerly brought up. I assure you it will be illuminating for all parties." A flicker of curiosity seemed to outweigh the judge's annoyance. "I'll allow it, Mr. Carter. But be brief." Benjamin nodded his thanks. He opened the leather portfolio and slid a single heavy-stock document across the table to Catherine. It was not a legal filing. It was topped with an embossed letterhead that was both discreet and incredibly powerful: the Ethelred Family Foundation. Richard stared, a frown of confusion on his face. He recognized the name, of course, but he couldn't comprehend its relevance here. Jessica Thorne simply looked bored and impatient, rolling her eyes, as if this were just another one of the dull wife's tedious hobbies. Catherine took the document and a pen from Benjamin. Her hand was perfectly steady. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but on the outside she was the picture of calm authority. Benjamin turned his attention back to the judge. "Your Honor, as you know, philanthropic foundations have deadlines and fiduciary duties that must be met. This document is the final authorization for the Q4 grant disbursement for a program we fund. It requires the signature of the chairperson of the board." He let the title hang in the air for a second before continuing. "The specific grant in question is for the continued funding of a judicial outreach program, one that provides mentorship and resources for newly appointed judges across the state. It's a program we're particularly proud of. It's called the Roth Initiative for Judicial Equity." Judge Evelyn Roth froze. Her pen stopped moving. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes locking with Benjamin's. The name of the program, her program, the one she had championed, the one that was her passion project outside of her official duties, had just been spoken aloud. The program she had personally secured funding for years ago from a large anonymous foundation. The Ethelred Foundation. The judge asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The very same," Benjamin confirmed gently. He then gestured toward Catherine, who was poised with the pen over the signature line. "Catherine Sterling, as chairperson, is the final signatory on all major disbursements, including, Your Honor, the ones that fund your initiative." Silence. It descended upon the courtroom like a physical thing, thick and absolute. It was a silence filled with the frantic screeching sound of gears turning in everyone's minds. Richard Sterling went white as a sheet. His jaw hung slack. He looked from the document to Catherine to the judge, his brain struggling to connect the dots. The quiet, docile wife he had mocked and underestimated. The charity work he had dismissed as a frivolous pastime. He was suddenly horribly beginning to understand. Jessica Thorne's smug expression dissolved into gaping confusion. This made no sense. This wasn't part of the script. Wives were supposed to cry, not sign important-looking papers in the middle of their own humiliation. Judge Roth's face was a mask of utter shock and dawning horror. The situation was suddenly impossibly compromised. The woman whose character was being assailed, whose husband was demanding spousal support from her, was the very same woman who chaired the foundation that was in essence a significant benefactor to her own professional legacy. The paycheck wasn't a direct salary, but it was something far more intertwined, a grant that funded the work closest to her heart. With a quiet, deliberate stroke of the pen, Catherine signed her name, Catherine Devereux Sterling. The soft scratch of the nib on the paper was the only sound in the cavernous silence. She slid the document back to Benjamin. She didn't look at Richard. She didn't look at Jessica. She looked directly at Judge Roth, her expression not triumphant, but simply stating a fact that had been ignored for far too long. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10, then 20. In that silent chasm, Richard Sterling's entire case, his campaign of intimidation, and his carefully constructed world of lies crumbled into dust. He had tried to mock a queen in her own court, never realizing that she owned the courthouse itself. The spell was broken by Judge Roth, clearing her throat, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the stunned courtroom. Her professional demeanor snapped back into place, but her face was pale, her eyes holding a new, complicated awareness as she looked at Catherine. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice strained but firm. "Ms. Harding, please approach the bench." Benjamin and a visibly shaken Diane Harding moved forward. The hushed conference was brief and tense. The words conflict of interest, recusal, and extraordinary circumstances were audible even from the tables. When they returned, Judge Roth's face was grim. Given the information that has just been brought to the court's attention, she announced, her voice resonating with judicial finality, "It is clear that I can no longer preside over this case. I am recusing myself effective immediately. All motions filed today are tabled. This hearing is adjourned until a new judge can be assigned. We are done for today." She struck the gavel, once a sharp, definitive crack that echoed the shattering of Richard Sterling's ambitions. As the judge swept from the room, chaos erupted in her wake. Diane Harding was furiously whispering to Richard, whose face was a ghastly shade of grey. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. Jessica Thorne was staring at Catherine, her earlier arrogance replaced by a mixture of disbelief and raw fear. She finally understood. The money, the power, she had coveted it, didn't belong to Richard. It had always belonged to the serene, pregnant woman she had just irrevocably insulted. Catherine stood, collected her things with unhurried grace, and walked out of the courtroom with Benjamin at her side, not once looking back. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Richard. The story, albeit in hushed and slightly distorted tones, ripped through Boston's legal and financial communities. The narrative wasn't just about a powerful wife. It was about the sheer, breathtaking stupidity of a man who had tried to swindle a dynasty he didn't even comprehend. His credibility was annihilated. Potential investors for a new fund he was raising began pulling their commitments. His partners at Sterling and Finch, whose firm's reputation was now irrevocably tied to his scandal, called an emergency board meeting. The fight between Richard and Jessica was volcanic. She accused him of lying to her, of misrepresenting his wealth and power. "You told me she was nobody," Jessica shrieked at him in the sterile lobby of Harding and Crow's offices. "You let me mock a woman who could buy and sell this entire city block. You've ruined me." "You ruined yourself," he snarled back, his own terror manifesting as rage. "Your big mouth just cost me everything." Their toxic alliance, built on greed and mutual opportunism, dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Jessica was gone from his life within a week, but the damage she had helped cause was permanent. With Judge Roth's recusal, the case was assigned to a new judge, Judge Peterson, a stern old jurist with zero tolerance for games. Empowered by the shift in momentum, Benjamin Carter went on the offensive. He filed motions to compel full, unredacted financial disclosures from Sterling and Finch. He subpoenaed years of Richard's personal and corporate credit card statements, expense reports, and travel logs. The forensic accountant's report landed on Judge Peterson's desk like a bombshell. It detailed in excruciating and irrefutable detail how Richard had systematically defrauded both his wife and his own company. He had created shell corporations to hide assets, funneled money intended for investments into offshore accounts, and used Catherine's initial trust fund as collateral for a series of disastrously risky ventures he'd hidden from everyone. He wasn't just a philanderer. He was a common criminal in a bespoke suit. Faced with the evidence, and with the looming threat of a separate federal investigation for wire fraud and embezzlement, Richard's position collapsed. Diane Harding, realizing her client was radioactive, advised him to settle, and to do it quickly. The settlement negotiations were not a negotiation at all. They were a surrender. Catherine, through Benjamin, dictated the terms. Richard would get nothing. He would cede all claims to the Beacon Hill house, the Nantucket estate, and any and all assets tied to the Ethelred Foundation or Catherine's family trusts. He would be forced to liquidate his shares in Sterling and Finch to pay back the money he had embezzled. He would be stripped of the Sterling name from the firm he co-founded. The paternity of the child was no longer questioned. It was a fact he would be legally bound to, with child support calculated, based on his new, drastically reduced circumstances. He was left with a fraction of what he once had his reputation, in ruins, his career over, and facing the very real possibility of indictment. He had flown too close to the sun, blinded by his own reflection, and the fall back to earth was brutal and absolute. The man who had entered the courtroom expecting to conquer and divide had crawled out with nothing but the ashes of his own arrogance. 6 months later, spring had returned to Boston. The magnolia trees in the public garden were in full glorious bloom, their pink and white blossoms a testament to renewal. From her new office on the top floor of the Ethelred Foundation building, Catherine Sterling could see them clearly. The view was panoramic, stretching from the gentle curve of the Charles River to the bustling heart of the city. It was a view of her city, her home, her future. The divorce was finalized. Richard had accepted the settlement without a fight, a broken man eager to avoid further legal scrutiny. He had moved out of Boston, retreating into obscurity. Jessica Thorne had vanished from the social scene, her 15 minutes of infamy having expired. The noise and the ugliness had faded, replaced by a profound and welcome peace. Catherine, now in the final weeks of her pregnancy, had never felt more powerful or more herself. The divorce had been a crucible, burning away the parts of her that were defined by her husband, leaving behind an unalloyed core of strength she never knew she possessed. She had stepped fully into her role as chairperson of the foundation, not as a custodian, but as a visionary. She led meetings with a quiet confidence that commanded respect. She challenged old assumptions, pushed for more impactful investments in community health and education, and spearheaded a new initiative focused on providing legal aid to women in domestic crises. Her work was no longer a hobby. It was her life's purpose, a legacy she was building for the child she was about to bring into the world. Her colleagues on the board who had once seen her as Ethelred Devereux's gentle granddaughter now saw her as his true heir, a leader with his strategic mind and her own unique compassion. Benjamin Carter remained her trusted counsel and friend, a constant source of wisdom and support. One bright May afternoon, as she stood by the expansive window of her office, she felt a strong, insistent kick from within. She smiled, placing both hands on her round belly. It was a girl. She had already chosen a name, Grace. "Hello in there, little one," she whispered. "Look at all that. One day we're going to make it even better." The past was a scar, but it no longer hurt. It was a reminder of a battle she had fought and won. Richard had seen her as a beautiful object, to be owned, a passive source of wealth, to be exploited. Jessica had seen her as a pathetic obstacle to be mocked and discarded. They had both made the same fatal mistake. They had judged the book by its beautifully bound cover, never bothering to read the steel-spined narrative within. She was Catherine Devereux Sterling. She was a mother, a leader, a survivor. She was the woman who had walked into a courtroom to reclaim her life, and had done so, not with tears or shouts, but with the quiet, devastating power of her own name on a signature line. Her future and the future of her daughter was not something to be granted or taken away by a man. It was something she would build herself on a foundation of integrity, strength, and grace. And it was going to be magnificent. 5 years is a lifetime. It is long enough for a wound to become a scar, for a ghost to lose its power, and for a house to become a home. The grand brownstone on Beacon Hill, once a cold stage for a fractured marriage, was now filled with the kind of warmth that only a child's laughter can create. Finger paintings, vibrant and chaotic, were taped to the refrigerator in the state-of-the-art kitchen. A tiny pink bicycle was parked with surprising neatness by the back door, and the sprawling library, once Richard's solemn sanctuary of ambition, now housed a magnificent dollhouse, and shelves overflowing with picture books. Catherine's life had been rebuilt on a foundation of her own making. At 36, she was a formidable presence in Boston's philanthropic world, her name synonymous not with scandal, but with progress and integrity. She was chairperson of the Ethelred Foundation in title and in spirit, guiding it with a steady hand and a clear vision. But her most cherished role was that of Mama. Grace Devereux. Sterling was a whirlwind of dark curls and boundless curiosity. She had Catherine's thoughtful grey eyes, but a spirit that was entirely her own, bright, fearless, and joyful. She was the sun around which Catherine's universe now revolved. Their days were a happy rhythm of preschool trips to the aquarium and quiet afternoons spent reading in the sun-drenched garden. The past was a story Catherine would one day have to tell, but for now, it was a locked room in a distant wing of her memory. The call came on a crisp autumn afternoon, while Catherine was helping Grace build a surprisingly stable tower of colourful blocks on the living room floor. The caller ID showed Benjamin Carter's name. "Ben," she answered, her voice warm. "I hope you aren't calling to tell me our grant proposal for the Children's Hospital wing has been delayed." "The hospital is fine, Kate," he said, but the usual warmth in his voice was absent, replaced by a weary professionalism she hadn't heard in years. "I'm afraid I have some unwelcome news. You should sit down." Catherine's heart gave a single hard thud against her ribs. She sank onto the plush sofa, her eyes on Grace, who who was now carefully placing a yellow block at the very top of her creation. "What is it?" "He's back." Benjamin said the two words landing with the force of a physical blow. "Richard, he's filed a petition with the family court. He's suing for visitation rights." The air in the room grew cold. Catherine felt a familiar chill, a phantom echo of the woman she used to be. For a moment, she was back in that sterile courtroom, the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her. But the moment passed. The fear was replaced by something else, something cold and hard and fiercely protective. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. Benjamin explained. Richard had a new lawyer, a young, idealistic man who specialized in father's rights. The petition was a work of fiction, painting Richard as a man who had spent the last 5 years in a crucible of self-reflection and atonement. It spoke of his profound regret and his unquenchable desire to know his only child. It alleged that Catherine had systematically alienated him from his daughter out of spite and vengeance, using her immense wealth to create an impenetrable fortress around the child. He wasn't asking for custody, not yet. He was asking for weekends, for holidays. He was asking for a foothold. "It's a performance, Kate," Benjamin concluded. "He's trying to rebrand himself as the victim, the penitent father being denied his natural rights by a cold, vindictive heiress. He's aiming for the court of public opinion before he ever steps in front of a judge." "He doesn't want Grace," Catherine said, the words coming out like chips of ice. She looked at her daughter, who was clapping her hands with delight at her finished tower. The thought of Richard's shadow falling across this perfect, innocent world filled her with a rage so pure it was almost silent. "He wants access. He wants the name. He wants the money. He wants to attach himself to our life because his has fallen apart." "I agree," Benjamin said. "We've already started digging. It seems his ventures after leaving Boston have all been catastrophic failures. He's buried in debt. This isn't about fatherhood. It's a financial lifeline dressed up in sickeningly sweet sentiment." "Then we fight." Catherine stated her decision absolute. "But not on his terms. We are not going to be dragged through a public spectacle. He wants to play the victim. We'll show the world what kind of man he truly is. Find everything, Ben. Every failed business, every unpaid creditor, every dirty little secret he's accumulated over the past 5 years. He's opened the door to his past. I want you to walk through it and bring back every skeleton you find." A week later, Catherine attended a fundraising gala for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. It was an obligation, but one she usually enjoyed. Tonight, however, her mind was elsewhere, churning over legal strategies. As she stood near the grand staircase, accepting polite greetings, a familiar face in the crowd caught her eye. It was Evelyn Roth, the judge who had recused herself from her divorce case. She was retired now, her hair a softer silver, the hard lines of judicial authority on her face replaced by a relaxed contentment. On an impulse, Catherine excused herself and walked over. "Judge Roth," she said quietly. Evelyn turned, and a look of genuine pleasant surprise crossed her face. "Mrs. Sterling. Catherine, it's so good to see you. Please, it's just Evelyn now." "Evelyn?" Catherine smiled. "You look well. Retirement suits you." "It's quieter, which I can't say I mind," Evelyn replied, her eyes twinkling. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the orchestra tuning up in the background. Then Evelyn's expression grew more serious. "I often think about that day in your hearing," she admitted, her voice low. "In over 30 years on the bench, I was never so completely blindsided. It was a lesson, a reminder that you can never truly know the full story of the people who stand before you. You handled an impossible situation with a level of grace and strength I have rarely seen." "Thank you, Evelyn," Catherine said, deeply touched. "That means a great deal." "I followed your work with the Ethelred Foundation," Evelyn continued. "The Judicial Equity Initiative is thriving. You've done remarkable things. You turned what could have been a bitter, defining moment of your life into a footnote. That is true power." They spoke for a few more minutes, two women connected by a single dramatic moment in time. As Catherine walked away, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Evelyn's words were a confirmation. She was not the woman who had been mocked and victimized. She was the woman who had survived, who had built a better life, who had earned her peace. And she would be damned if she let Richard Sterling steal it from her or her daughter. The evidence Benjamin's investigators compiled was even more damning than they had hoped. Richard's 5 years in exile had been a pathetic tour of failed crypto schemes, a disastrous foray into real estate development in Florida that ended in lawsuits and a trail of broken promises and burned bridges. He was living in a rented condo in Arizona, driving a leased car, and was being pursued by at least 3 different creditors. He wasn't just broke, he was a pariah. The final piece of the puzzle was a series of emails acquired legally from a disgruntled former business partner in which Richard explicitly laid out his strategy. "The kid is the golden ticket," he had written. "Once I get visitation, the press will be all over it. The sympathy will flow. A Sterling Devereux trust for her education and well-being is a certainty. I just need to get my foot in the door. She'll be my path back to solvency." It was the smoking gun. It was cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of any paternal feeling. Benjamin arranged a meeting not with Richard, but with his young, idealistic lawyer. They met in Benjamin's quiet, book-lined office. Catherine was not present. Her presence wasn't needed. This was an execution, not a negotiation. Benjamin let the younger lawyer make his passionate opening statement about a father's rights. He listened patiently. When he was finished, Benjamin slid a thick bound file across the polished desk. "This is what your client has been doing for the past 5 years, Benjamin said calmly. "And this," he added, placing a printed copy of the damning emails on top, "is why he is doing it." The lawyer's face paled as he read. The color drained from his cheeks, his idealistic fervor replaced by the dawning horror of a man who realizes he's been played for a fool. "If you proceed with this petition," Benjamin continued, his voice leaving no room for argument, "all of this will be submitted as evidence to the court. It will become a matter of public record. Your client won't be seen as a penitent father. He will be seen as a grifter trying to exploit his own child. He will be humiliated, and you, by extension, will have your professional reputation irrevocably tarnished by your association with him." He let that sink in. Then he delivered the final, elegant checkmate. "However, my client is not a vindictive woman. She has no desire to destroy Richard Sterling. She simply desires to protect her daughter and her peace. She is willing to facilitate a solution." Benjamin outlined the terms. The Ethelred Foundation, as part of its ongoing charitable work, would make a significant anonymous donation to a non-profit consumer credit counseling service. That service would then, in turn, be able to offer a debt forgiveness plan to a number of individuals, one of whom would happen to be Richard. His most crushing debts would be cleared. In return, Richard would withdraw his petition immediately and sign a legally binding document relinquishing all parental rights to Grace now and forever. He would disappear from their lives permanently. "He has a choice," Benjamin finished. "A quiet life free from debt in exchange for his silence, or a very loud, very public ruin. What my client is offering him is not a payoff. It is a mercy he doesn't deserve. It is the price of his peace and of hers. The young lawyer, utterly defeated, could only nod. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was signed. Richard Sterling took the deal, his greed outweighing any manufactured pride. He vanished again, this time for good, a ghost finally exorcised. That evening, Catherine was tucking Grace into bed. The little girl was already half asleep, her dark curls splayed across the pillow. "Mama," she murmured, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Sing the star song." Catherine smiled, her heart swelling with a love so vast it almost hurt. She sat on the edge of the bed and began to sing the soft, simple lyrics of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." As her voice filled the quiet room, she looked at the beautiful, perfect child she had fought so hard to protect. She had faced down the demons of her past, not with courtroom theatrics, but with the quiet, unyielding strength she had forged in the fire. She had bought her peace. She had secured her future. And now, in the tranquil safety of her daughter's bedroom, she was finally completely free. The story of Catherine Sterling is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with threats and intimidation. Sometimes the most devastating power is the one that is held in reserve, wielded with quiet intelligence and unshakable resolve. It's a story about the danger of underestimating someone based on their gentle demeanor and the ultimate triumph of integrity over arrogance and greed. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice, Catherine's victory came from a place of deep foundational power that her tormentors were too blind to see. Her signature wasn't just an act of defiance, it was an act of self-reclamation, proving that the quietest person in the room can in fact be the most powerful. If this story of quiet strength and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of justice and empowerment. Your support helps us bring these incredible stories to light. Thank you for listening.